My wife left me for a rich friend. Days later, his wife came to me in tears. She said, "Marry me, and I'll show you the truth." I thought it was crazy. Until I said yes, what I found after the wedding turned their world upside down. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now let's dive into today's story. Walter Harlan was 39 years old when his wife walked out of their marriage and into another man's bed. He remembered the exact moment she told him, not because of tears or shouting, but because of how quiet the house felt afterward. The refrigerator hummed. The dog's nails clicked against the kitchen tile. And Tessa stood by the counter, arms crossed, looking at him like he was furniture she decided to replace. They lived in Boone County, Missouri, just outside Columbia, in one of those clean subdivisions where every house looked similar enough to feel safe, but different enough to avoid monotony. The Harlan home had cream-colored siding, a two-car garage, and a front yard Walter mowed every Saturday morning without fail. Inside, everything had its place. Bills paid early. Groceries bought on Thursdays. Oil changes scheduled before the sticker said they were due. Walter worked operations for a regional trucking company called Midwest Freight Solutions. It wasn't glamorous. The office smelled like old coffee and printer toner. The hours stretched long, especially during peak seasons when supply chains tightened, and every delay meant another phone call, another problem to solve. But the work had structure, clear rules, predictable outcomes. Walter liked that. He believed consistency was a form of character, that showing up every day and doing the job right said more about a man than grand gestures or empty promises ever could. Tessa used to agree with him, or at least she said she did. She was 36, blonde, with a face that looked younger than her years and a laugh that used to come easily. She worked part-time in nonprofit that organized community events, fundraisers, charity auctions, volunteer drives. It kept her busy without overwhelming her. She'd always said she appreciated the stability Walter provided, the predictability, the safety. But somewhere along the way, safety became suffocation. Walter noticed the change gradually. Small things first. Tessa started dressing sharper. New blouses, tailored pants, jewelry she didn't wear around the house. She came home later, citing meetings that ran long or co-workers who needed help. Her phone buzzed more often, and she kept it face down on the counter. He didn't ask questions. Not at first. He told himself it was work stress or a phase. People changed. Marriages had seasons. Then came the fundraiser. It was held at some renovated warehouse downtown, the kind of venue with exposed brick and Edison bulbs that made everything look artfully unfinished. Walter went because Tessa asked him to. He wore a navy blazer that felt too tight in the shoulders and stood near the bar, nursing a beer while Tessa worked the room. She was good at that, smiling, shaking hands, making people feel seen. That's when Drew Colson appeared. Drew owned several self-storage facilities around Columbia and liked making sure people knew it. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked hair and a tan that looked professional. He wore expensive shirts with the sleeves rolled up just enough to show a Tag Heuer watch. When he talked, he stood too close and spoke too loud, punctuating sentences with gestures that demanded attention. He laughed at his own jokes before anyone else had the chance. Walter watched from across the room as Drew approached Tessa. Watched the way Drew leaned in, hand brushing her arm. Watched Tessa laugh, genuinely laugh, in a way she hadn't with Walter in months. Men like Drew always thought confidence was proof of worth. After that night, Tessa's late arrivals became routine. She stopped asking about Walter's day, stopped cooking the meals they used to share. The house grew quieter, not from peace, but from absence. She was there physically, but gone in every way that mattered. Walter reviewed his own behavior. Had he been inattentive? Cold? He worked long hours, yes, but he always came home. He didn't drink heavily, didn't gamble, didn't cheat. He provided. He was faithful. He was steady. Apparently, that was the problem. One Tuesday night in March, Tessa walked into the living room where Walter sat reviewing spreadsheets on his laptop. The television played in the background, some documentary he wasn't really watching. She stood between him and the screen, arms folded, face set in an expression he'd never seen before. Not angry, not sad, just decided. I'm not in love with you anymore, she said. Her voice was calm, matter of fact, like she was telling him they were out of milk. Walter looked up from the laptop. The spreadsheet blurred in his peripheral vision. What? I'm not in love with you, Tessa repeated. She didn't sit down, didn't move closer. I haven't been for a while. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. The dog, an aging lab named Porter, shifted position on his bed in the corner, tags jingling. Is this about Drew Coulson? Walter asked. His voice came out steadier than he expected. Tessa's jaw tightened. This is about me. About what I need. Which is something different. Someone who makes me feel alive. Walter closed the laptop slowly. And I don't. You're a good man, Walter. Tessa's tone softened slightly, but her posture didn't. You're dependable, reliable, but that's not enough anymore. So you're leaving? I already have an apartment lined up. I'll get my things this weekend. 2 days later, she moved into Drew Coulson's lake house. They didn't hide it. Within a week, photos appeared on social media. Tessa and Drew on a boat, drinks in hand, sun glinting off the water behind them. Tessa and Drew at a restaurant Walter recognized. One he'd suggested taking her to months ago, and she'd said it was too expensive. Drew's arm around her shoulders. Her head tilted against his chest. The comments rolled in. So happy for you. You deserve this. New beginnings. Walter deleted his social media accounts the same day he saw the first photo. Not out of pain, out of efficiency. There was no point watching a narrative he couldn't control. Mutual friends stopped calling. Not because they were cruel, but because they were uncomfortable. Divorce made people choose sides, and most chose the side that looked happier in photos. A few sent awkward text messages. Hey, just checking in. But Walter replied with brief, polite responses that discouraged follow-up. The divorce papers arrived via certified mail. Walter signed them at the kitchen table, the same table where Tessa had once told him she wanted to spend her life with him. The dog watched from his bed, brown eyes tired and knowing. Tessa sent one message after the filing. I deserve happiness. Walter stared at the text for 30 seconds. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. He typed nothing, deleted the message instead. He didn't drink, didn't call her, didn't show up at Drew's lake house demanding answers. He did what he'd always done. He reviewed facts. He pulled old bank statements, checked credit card transactions, reviewed emails from the past 2 years. He wasn't looking for revenge. He was looking for patterns, inconsistencies, the timeline of when things began and how deep the deception ran. Not because he wanted to hurt anyone, because he needed to understand the full scope of the damage. 3 weeks after the divorce papers were filed, someone knocked on Walter's door. It was a Saturday morning. Walter had just finished mowing the lawn, and his shirt clung to his back with sweat. The grass clippings smelled sharp and green in the humid air. He opened the door expecting a neighbor or maybe a delivery. Instead, he found Mara Coulson. She was younger than Walter expected, mid-30s maybe, dark hair pulled into a ponytail. She wore jeans and a plain t-shirt. No makeup, eyes red-rimmed, but dry. She looked like someone who'd been crying for days but had finally run out of tears. Walter Harlan? She asked. Yes, I'm Mara Coulson, Drew's wife. She paused. Or I was. I don't know what I am anymore. Walter stepped aside. Come in. She walked past him into the small entryway, glancing around at the neat, sparse interior. Walter led her to the kitchen table, the same one where he'd signed divorce papers, where Tessa had delivered her verdict. Mara sat down slowly, hands folded in front of her, staring at the wood grain like she was memorizing each line. Walter poured 2 glasses of water from the tap, set one in front of her, sat down across the table. How did you find me? He asked. Your address was in Drew's phone. Under Harlan, T's X. Mara's voice was flat, exhausted. I went through everything after he left. Every text, every email, every credit card statement. When did he leave? 2 weeks ago. Officially. But he checked out months before that. She took a sip of water, then set the glass down carefully. He's done this before. Other women. Other promises. But this time he moved everything. Money. Properties. He actually left. Walter watched her. She didn't fidget, didn't look away. Despite the exhaustion, There was something solid underneath. Something that hadn't broken yet. "Why are you here?" he asked. Mara met his eyes. "Because Drew thinks I'm stupid. He thinks I didn't notice. And I need you to know that I did." "Notice what?" "The transfers. The new LLCs. The documents he had me sign without explaining them fully." She pulled a folder from her bag and placed it on the table. "I handle payroll for one of his storage facilities. Not the big decisions, but enough to see patterns." Walter didn't reach for the folder. And I kept copies of everything." The kitchen fell quiet except for the refrigerator's hum and Porter's soft snoring from the living room. Walter studied Mara's face. She wasn't asking for comfort, wasn't looking for a shoulder to cry on. She was asking for cooperation. "What do you want from me?" Walter asked. "I want Drew to face consequences," Mara said simply. "Real ones, not just inconvenience. And I think you might want the same thing." Walter leaned back in his chair. "I don't want revenge. I want to move on." Moving on doesn't mean letting them get away with it. Mara opened the folder and spread several documents across the table. Bank statements, property deeds, email printouts. Drew transferred ownership of 3 properties to shell companies 2 months before he left. He pressured me to sign papers I didn't fully read. He thought he was covering his tracks. Walter scanned the documents. His operations background kicked in automatically. Patterns, numbers, timelines. "You have proof of coercion?" "Better." Mara pulled her phone from her pocket and placed it face up on the table. "I have a recording." "Of what?" Drew explaining to his business partner how Tessa is temporary and how he plans to keep me legally stuck until all the assets are out of reach. Missouri is a one-party consent state. The recording is legal. Walter picked up the phone. "Press play." Drew's voice came through tinny but clear. "Mara won't move fast enough to stop anything. By the time she figures it out, everything will be restructured. And Tessa? She's fun, but she's not permanent. I just need someone who makes me feel good right now. Once things cool down, I'll settle things with Mara on my terms." The recording continued for 3 more minutes. Drew laughing. His partner asking if he was sure. Drew saying he'd done this before and knew how to handle emotional women. Walter set the phone down. "You recorded this when?" 6 weeks ago, before he left. I had a feeling." Mara's voice didn't waver. "So I started documenting everything." Walter looked at the documents again, then at Mara. She wasn't crying, wasn't shaking. She was calm, focused, dangerous in the way only truly intelligent people could be when they'd been underestimated. "This doesn't end with yelling," Walter said. Mara nodded. "That's exactly why I came to you." They didn't confront anyone. Over the next 2 weeks, Walter and Mara met 3 more times. Once at a coffee shop on the edge of town where no one knew them. Twice at Walter's house after dark. Papers spread across the kitchen table like battle plans. Mara filed a financial disclosure amendment with her attorney. The language was precise, clinical. It outlined every property transfer, every shell company, every document signed under pressure. She didn't accuse Drew of fraud outright. She simply asked for clarification on assets that might have been misrepresented during initial separation proceedings. Quiet, accurate, devastating. Walter, meanwhile, took a different approach. He alerted his company's legal department that someone might attempt to fabricate documents using his name or Tessa's to establish financial claims. It sounded paranoid, overly cautious, but the legal team logged it in their system, stamped it, filed it. That step would matter later. In the meantime, Tessa and Drew played house at the lake. Photos continued appearing online. Dinners at upscale restaurants. Weekend trips to Kansas City and St. Louis. Tessa wore clothes Walter had never seen. Designer labels, expensive shoes. Her hair looked professionally styled. Her skin glowed from facials and treatments. Drew encouraged all of it. He liked showing her off, liked the attention, liked proving to everyone that he could trade up. What he didn't realize was that Tessa's new lifestyle was funded by accounts that looked deep but weren't liquid. The storage business had cash flow, yes, but much of Drew's apparent wealth was tied up in properties and loans. His operation ran on leverage, borrowing against one asset to buy another, constantly cycling debt to maintain appearance. It worked as long as nothing got scrutinized too closely. Walter watched it all from a distance. He didn't follow them, didn't drive past Drew's lake house. He simply kept track of public records, property transfers, business filings, court documents. People thought karma arrived loudly. Cosmic justice delivered with thunder and lightning. Walter knew better. Karma arrived as math. The first crack appeared in late April. Drew's primary lender, a regional bank that held mortgages on 4 of his storage facilities, noticed irregularities during a routine audit. Nothing major, just discrepancies between reported ownership and actual title holders. Small enough to be paperwork errors, large enough to require investigation. The bank sent inquiries. Drew responded with explanations that sounded reasonable but didn't quite line up with documentation on file. More questions followed. Timelines didn't match. Signatures looked inconsistent. Meanwhile, Mara's amended financial disclosure triggered its own audit. The family court judge assigned to the divorce case ordered both parties to submit comprehensive asset lists with supporting documentation. Not a criminal investigation, just standard procedure when one party claimed hidden assets, but invasive nonetheless. Drew hired an attorney who charged $400 an hour and talked about aggressive defense strategies. The attorney sent stern letters to Mara's lawyer, threatened countersuits, accused Mara of filing frivolous claims. Mara's attorney responded with copies of the documents she'd provided, bank statements, property deeds, the timeline of transfers, and a note mentioning that additional evidence existed if the court required it. Drew's attorney stopped threatening after that. At Walter's house, Mara sat at the kitchen table reviewing new document her lawyer had sent over. Walter made coffee, strong, black the way Mara liked it. Porter lay at her feet, enjoying the attention of someone new. Drew's partners are asking questions, Mara said, not looking up from the papers. One of them called me yesterday. Wanted to know if I was trying to destroy the business. What did you say? I said I was trying to get what I'm legally owed. Nothing more. She flipped a page. He said Drew's been distracted lately. Missing meetings. Making bad calls. Walter sat down with his own coffee. Distracted how? Playing house with your ex-wife. Taking long weekends. Acting like nothing matters. Mara finally looked up. His partners don't care about his personal life. They care about returns. And right now, Drew's not delivering. Walter sipped his coffee. Good. One deal already fell through. They were supposed to acquire a facility in Jefferson City. Financing backed out at the last minute. Why? Bank said due diligence raised concerns. Mara's mouth curved slightly. Not quite a smile. Concerns about ownership structures. Walter set his mug down. How bad is his financial situation, really? Worse than it looks. He carries a lot of debt. The storage facilities generate revenue, but margins are thin. He's been using profits from one location to cover shortfalls at others. It's sustainable as long as everything runs smooth. She tapped the papers in front of her. But audits aren't smooth. Audits are expensive. And Drew's burning cash, trying to impress Tessa. How much cash? Last month alone? Probably $15,000. Restaurants, trips, jewelry, clothes. He bought her a car. Walter raised an eyebrow. What kind of car? Audi Q5. Leased, not owned. But still. Mara leaned back in her chair. He's trying to prove something. To her. To himself. To everyone who ever doubted him. And when the money stops, then we find out what Tessa is really in this for. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening in early May. Walter was sitting on his back deck, watching the sun drop behind the tree line. The air had cooled, and cicadas droned in the distance. His phone buzzed. Tessa's name appeared on the screen. He stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Hello. Walter. Tessa's voice sounded strained. Uncertain. I need to ask you something. All right. Why are people asking me about Drew's finances? Walter sipped his iced tea. What people? Lawyers. Accountants. Someone from his bank called today, asking if I had access to certain accounts. She paused. Do you know anything about this? No. Are you sure? Because the timing seems. I signed the divorce papers. Tessa, I'm done with your life. If Drew's having financial problems, that's between you and him. Silence stretched across the line. In the background, Walter heard music playing. Something classical. Piano. Mara's been causing trouble, Tessa said finally. She's trying to ruin him. Mara's protecting herself. There's a difference. She's making false claims. Drew said, I don't care what Drew said. Walter's voice remained even. Calm. You chose him. Whatever comes with that choice is yours to deal with. More silence. I just thought maybe you'd know something, Tessa said quietly. Since you always keep track of things. I keep track of my own things. Not yours. Not anymore. Walter. Goodbye, Tessa. He ended the call. Set the phone face down on the deck railing. Watched the last sliver of sun disappear completely. That was the last time they spoke directly. By mid-May, Drew's situation had deteriorated from concerning to critical. The audit expanded. What started as routine questions about property ownership became a comprehensive review of business practices. The bank wanted explanations for every transfer, every loan application, every financial statement submitted over the past 3 years. Drew's attorney billed another $12,000 and produced documents that raised more questions than they answered. Dates didn't align. Signatures appeared inconsistent. Asset valuations seemed inflated. Meanwhile, Drew's business partners grew nervous. One pulled out of a pending acquisition. Another started asking for his initial investment back. A third quietly began consulting his own attorney about potential liability. Drew tried to project confidence. He posted photos online, smiling with Tessa, standing in front of one of his storage facilities, wearing expensive casual wear that screamed success. But people who knew how to look could see the strain. His face looked thinner, his smile forced. The photos appeared less frequently. Tessa, for her part, started posting less too. The trips slowed down. The fancy dinners became less frequent. She still looked polished in photos, but something had shifted. The glow had faded slightly. Walter saw all this through Mara, who tracked it methodically. She kept a spreadsheet of Drew's public activity, cross-referenced with court filings and financial documents. She wasn't obsessive, just thorough. He's snapping at her, Mara said one evening at Walter's house. They'd fallen into a routine of meeting once a week, comparing notes, adjusting strategy. A mutual friend saw them at a restaurant. Said Drew was short-tempered, kept checking his phone, barely talked to Tessa. How's she taking it? Quiet, subdued. Mara scrolled through her phone, showing Walter a recent photo. Tessa and Drew at some outdoor event. Drew's arm around her, but his attention elsewhere. Tessa's smile looked painted on. She's realizing this isn't what she thought it would be. Walter studied the photo. She made her choice. She made a stupid choice based on fantasy. Drew sold her a dream, and now reality's showing up. That's not our problem. I know. Mara put her phone away, but it's going to be hers. The turning point came in June. Drew's credit froze. It happened suddenly, though the groundwork had been laid for weeks. The bank audit concluded with findings that questioned the accuracy of financial disclosures Drew had submitted for multiple loans. Not fraud, not yet, but serious enough that the bank suspended his credit line, pending further review. For someone whose business model depended on leverage, this was catastrophic. Drew couldn't finance the Jefferson City acquisition, couldn't cover operational shortfalls at underperforming locations, couldn't access the cushion he'd always relied on to smooth over problems. His partners demanded answers. When those answers didn't satisfy them, they demanded repayment of invested capital. When Drew couldn't provide immediate liquidity, they threatened lawsuits. Everything Drew had built, the reputation, the appearance, the carefully maintained image, began collapsing under its own weight. And because Tessa was financially dependent on Drew, his crisis became hers. Credit cards declined at restaurants. The Audi lease payment bounced. The lake house, which Drew rented rather than owned, received a notice for late payment. Tessa called Drew's assistant asking when certain promised transfers would clear. The assistant, clearly uncomfortable, said she'd have Drew call back. He didn't. Mara's legal team, sensing opportunity, forced additional asset disclosures. Every property Drew owned came under scrutiny. Every debt surfaced. Every promise made to investors got documented and questioned. The image Drew had spent years building, successful entrepreneur, savvy businessman, confident winner, cracked and crumbled. Walter learned all this secondhand through Mara, but he also saw it directly. One afternoon, he stopped at a gas station on the south side of Columbia and spotted Drew's truck at the pump next to him. Drew stood beside the vehicle, phone pressed to his ear, face red, gesturing angrily as he spoke. "I don't care what it takes," Drew said loud enough for Walter to hear. "Find the money. Move it from the Ashland account if you have to. Just make it work." Drew glanced over and locked eyes with Walter. For a moment, neither man moved. Drew's expression shifted from anger to recognition to something harder. Walter held his gaze, face neutral, then calmly finished pumping his gas. Drew ended his call, stepped around his truck. "You're happy about this, aren't you?" Walter replaced the pump nozzle. "About what?" "Don't play stupid. Your ex-wife's been feeding you information. Mara and I don't talk about you." "Bullshit. You're working together, trying to destroy me." Walter closed his gas cap. "I'm not trying to do anything. I'm living my life. You should try it." Drew's jaw clenched. "You're bitter because Tessa chose me. Chose better." Walter looked at him, really looked, at the expensive clothes that couldn't hide the stress, at the watch that probably cost more than Walter's mortgage payment, at the truck that wasn't quite as clean as it used to be. "How's that working out for you?" Walter asked quietly. Drew stepped closer. "You think you won something? You think making my life harder proves you're better than me?" "I haven't done anything to you, Drew. You did this to yourself." Walter opened his truck door. "I just watched it happen. You self-righteous. You took my wife. Congratulations. Now you get to keep her." Walter climbed into his truck. "Enjoy it." He drove away before Drew could respond. By early July, Drew lost 2 storage facilities. The first went to foreclosure after he missed 3 consecutive mortgage payments. The second got seized through a partnership dissolution lawsuit. His former business partner claimed Drew had misrepresented asset values and hidden debts, making the entire venture fraudulent. Drew fought both actions, hired more attorneys, burned through what cash reserves he had left. But fighting legal battles required money, and money was exactly what he no longer had. His remaining partners distanced themselves publicly. Statements got issued, press releases carefully worded to separate their reputations from Drew's sinking ship. The local business community, which had once welcomed Drew to networking events and charity boards, grew suddenly unavailable. Calls went unreturned. Invitations dried up. In business, reputation wasn't everything. It was the only thing. And Drew's reputation now carried the stench of failure. Tessa, watching this unfold from inside Drew's shrinking world, finally understood what she'd traded her marriage for. She left the lake house on a Friday afternoon in mid-July. No dramatic scene. No social media announcement. She simply packed her belongings, many still new, tags still attached to some, in her old Honda Accord and drove away while Drew was meeting with yet another attorney. She moved into a small rental on the east side of town, a duplex with thin walls and a shared driveway. The landlord ran her credit twice before approving the application. She took a job at a boutique downtown that paid $12 an hour plus commission. The owner didn't know or care about Tessa's previous life. Mara learned this through the same mutual friend network that had once posted celebratory comments on Tessa's photos. Now those same people whispered quietly about karma and what goes around. "She's working retail," Mara told Walter one evening. They sat on his back deck, glasses of lemonade sweating in the humid air. "Full-time. The boutique on 9th Street. Walter nodded, but said nothing. Drew tried calling her. She didn't answer. He showed up at her apartment. She wouldn't let him in. That's not surprising. He's alone now. Mara's voice carried no satisfaction, just observation. Partner's gone. Business crumbling. Tessa gone. He bet everything on an image, and the image couldn't survive scrutiny. Walter watched fireflies blink in the darkening yard. "What happens with your case?" "Settlement talks next week. My attorney thinks Drew will agree to terms. He doesn't have the resources to fight anymore." She sipped her lemonade. "I'm not getting rich, but I'm getting what I'm owed. What I earned staying loyal for 15 years while he played games. That's all you wanted. That's all anyone should want. Fairness, not revenge. Just fair treatment for investment made in good faith." They sat in comfortable silence as night settled in fully. Porter snored softly on his bed just inside the door. Somewhere down the street, someone was grilling, and the smell of charcoal smoke drifted on the breeze. Do you hate them? Mara asked eventually. Walter considered the question. No, not even a little. Hate requires caring. I don't care about them anymore. I care about moving forward. That's healthier than I am. Mara smiled slightly. I still hate Drew. Not constantly, but sometimes I wake up angry about the wasted years. That'll fade. You think so? I think anger burns out when there's nothing left to fuel it. Right now, you're still in the middle of legal proceedings. Once that's done, once you've moved on completely, the anger won't have anywhere to live. Mara looked at him thoughtfully. You're surprisingly wise for someone who got betrayed. I'm not wise. I'm just tired of wasting energy on people who don't deserve it. The settlement came through in August. Drew agreed to terms that gave Mara a fair split of marital assets. Less than she might have won in a prolonged court battle, but enough to restart her life without financial devastation. She got a cash payout, one of the remaining storage facilities, and freedom from any of Drew's business debts. Drew kept his name and what little remained of his business. 2 storage facilities, a modest house, a reputation that would take years to rebuild if he could rebuild it at all. In business, especially in a small community like Columbia, reputation was currency. Drew's currency had been devalued to nearly nothing. He could operate, could survive, but the days of being sought after, respected, envied, those days were finished. Mara called Walter the day the settlement finalized. Her voice sounded lighter than he'd heard in months. It's done, she said. I signed the papers this morning. How do you feel? Relieved, exhausted, free. She paused. Thank you. I couldn't have done this without you. You would have. You're stronger than you think. Maybe, but it helped having someone who understood. Someone who wasn't trying to tell me to forgive or move on or see the best in people who didn't deserve it. What's next for you? Walter asked. I'm moving. Not far. Just to a different town. Somewhere I can start fresh without running into Drew or mutual friends every time I go to the grocery store. That sounds good. What about you? Are you staying in Columbia? Walter looked around his house, the place he'd shared with Tessa, where they'd built a life that turned out to be temporary. No, I'm selling. Already accepted an offer. I'm transferring to our company's facility near the Ozarks. Smaller town. Quieter. Running away. Starting over. There's a difference. Mara laughed softly. I suppose there is. Will you keep in touch? If you want to. I do. Not about them. Just as friends who survived something difficult. I can do that. They said goodbye with promises to send updates once they'd both settled into new lives. Walter hung up and looked around his kitchen one last time as the owner of this house, this symbol of everything he'd built with Tessa. He didn't feel sad, didn't feel angry. He felt ready. Walter moved in September. The new town was called Cedar Ridge, population 4,200, nestled in the hills an hour south of Springfield. The Midwest Freight Solutions facility there was smaller, less hectic, staffed by people who'd lived in the area their whole lives and viewed outsiders with polite curiosity rather than suspicion. Walter bought a house on 5 acres at the end of a gravel road. Single story, wood siding, a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. The previous owner had maintained it well, new roof, solid foundation, plumbing that worked. Behind the house, woods stretched deep and quiet. No neighbors close enough to hear. No subdivision rules about lawn maintenance or fence heights. Just space, silence, room to breathe. Porter loved it. The old dog rediscovered energy Walter thought was gone, spending afternoons exploring the property, sniffing every tree, chasing scents only he could detect. Walter settled into a new routine. He worked his shifts at the freight facility. Different people, same work, same satisfaction in solving logistical problems. He came home to his quiet house, made simple meals, sat on the porch with coffee in the mornings and whiskey in the evenings, watching the light change through the trees. He didn't follow Tessa or Drew online, didn't check their social media, didn't ask mutual acquaintances for updates. He didn't need to know. Their lives were no longer relevant to his. But he did hear things. Small-town networks spread information differently than suburban ones. Through work connections, through Mara's occasional texts, through the simple osmosis of living in the same general region. He heard that Drew lost the third storage facility by October. Heard that Drew moved into a modest apartment, driving a used sedan instead of his truck. Heard that Drew took a job managing someone else's storage business, working for a salary instead of running his own empire. He heard that Tessa stayed at the boutique. Heard she lived quietly, kept to herself, avoided the social scenes where she'd once thrived. Heard she looked older, tired, less polished than the woman who'd left Walter for something better. He didn't gloat, didn't feel vindicated. He simply noted the information and moved on. Because revenge wasn't what Walter had wanted. Revenge was active, purposeful, driven by emotion. What happened to Drew and Tessa wasn't revenge. It was consequence. The natural result of choices made and facades that couldn't withstand scrutiny. Drew had built a life on leverage and image, and when either one failed, everything collapsed. Tessa had traded stability for fantasy, and when fantasy proved hollow, she was left with neither. Walter hadn't caused their downfall. He'd simply documented it, made sure the truth couldn't be hidden or rewritten. Let math and law and natural consequences do their work. People wanted to believe karma was dramatic. Lightning strikes and cosmic justice. But karma was quieter than that. Karma was the steady accumulation of choices. The compound interest of decisions made in pursuit of short-term satisfaction over long-term sustainability. Drew and Tessa hadn't suffered because Walter chased revenge. They suffered because they made choices that couldn't survive daylight. And Walter had simply ensured daylight reached every corner. On a Saturday morning in late October, Walter stood on his porch drinking coffee and watching mist rise from the woods. The air had cooled properly now, carrying that sharp autumn clarity that made everything feel crisp and defined. His phone buzzed. A text from Mara. Settled in my new place. Small apartment near Joplin. Quiet. Finally feels like mine. How's Cedar Ridge? Walter typed back, good. Quiet. Same. Ever regret not fighting harder? Making more noise? Walter considered the question. Sipped his coffee. Watched Porter nose through fallen leaves in the yard. No, they burned down their own lives. I just got out of the way. Do you think they learned anything? Probably not. People like them rarely do. They'll blame circumstances, bad timing, other people, anything but themselves. Does that bother you? Walter thought about it. About Tessa sitting in that small duplex, working retail, living the ordinary life she'd rejected. About Drew managing someone else's business, answering to people who once worked for him. No, he typed, their awareness isn't my responsibility. Their consequences were enough. You never forgave them. Walter stared at those words. People talked about forgiveness like it was necessary for healing. Like holding on to anger poisoned the person carrying it. But Walter wasn't carrying anger. He was simply not absolving them. Forgiveness suggested what they'd done was forgivable. It wasn't. I didn't need to forgive them, he typed back. I needed to move past them. That's what I did. Fair enough. I'm working on the same thing. You'll get there. Thanks, Walter, for everything. Take care of yourself, Mara. Walter put his phone away, finished his coffee, looked out at the property he owned outright. No mortgage, no shared history, no memories of betrayal embedded in the walls. He'd paid for this with the proceeds from his old house. The house he'd shared with Tessa. The house that represented everything they'd built together and everything she'd destroyed. That money had been his, earned through years of steady work and consistent saving. When Tessa left, she took half the joint accounts, but nothing more. The house had been in Walter's name, purchased before marriage, protected. She'd walked away with cash and Drew's promises. Walter walked away with assets and clarity. Now, those assets had bought him this space, silence, freedom from the past. People might say he'd won. That karma had delivered justice. Walter didn't think in those terms. He'd simply survived, made clear-headed decisions, refused to let emotion override reason. The rest had been consequence. Natural, inevitable. Drew and Tessa had built their relationship on betrayal, funded it with borrowed money and hollow promises, and sustained it with the fantasy that happiness came from escaping rather than building. When fantasy met reality, reality always won. Walter hadn't needed revenge because he'd understood from the beginning what would happen. That Drew's leverage would collapse. That Tessa's new life would dissolve. That choices made in passion rarely survived the cold scrutiny of time. He'd known, so he documented, protected himself legally, cooperated with Mara, who had evidence and motivation. And then he'd step back and let math do what math does. The only thing Walter had truly wanted was clarity, understanding of what went wrong, knowledge of the full scope of the betrayal. He'd gotten that, and in getting it, he'd also gotten free. Winter came to Cedar Ridge with the quiet confidence of something that belonged. Snow fell in soft, steady layers, covering the woods and fields in white silence. Walter's house stayed warm. The wood stove he'd installed worked perfectly, radiating heat that smelled like oak and hickory. He worked his shifts at the freight facility, came home to Porter and the quiet. Sometimes he'd sit on the porch, even in the cold, bundled in a heavy coat, watching his breath fog the air. He didn't think about Tessa often. When he did, it wasn't with longing or anger, just a kind of distant acknowledgement. She'd been part of his life. Now she wasn't. The same way high school, or his first apartment, or any other concluded chapter existed in memory without emotional weight. She'd made her choice, lived with the consequences, moved on in whatever way she could. That was enough. Walter had made his own choice, to protect himself, to demand fairness, to refuse absolution for behavior that deserved none, and then to build something new. The house in Cedar Ridge, the quiet life, the routine that served him rather than trapping him. People who knew the story, Mara, a few coworkers who'd heard pieces, sometimes asked if he was happy. Walter didn't know how to answer that. Happiness seemed like the wrong metric. He wasn't pursuing happiness. He was pursuing stability, peace, self-determination. But if peace felt like happiness, then yes, maybe he was happy. He didn't need forgiveness to feel that peace. Didn't need Tessa to apologize or Drew to acknowledge wrongdoing. Didn't need cosmic justice or dramatic confrontations. He just needed them gone from his life. And they were. The winter deepened. Walter kept working, kept living, kept building the life he'd chosen rather than accepting the life that had been taken from him. One evening in mid-January, almost a full year after Tessa had told him she wasn't in love anymore, Walter sat on his porch watching snow fall through the porch light's glow. Porter lay beside him, gray muzzle resting on Walter's boot. His phone buzzed. An email. From Tessa. He stared at the notification. Felt nothing particular. No spike of anger or anxiety. Just mild curiosity. He opened it. Walter, I don't know if you'll read this. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. I wanted to say I'm sorry. Not because I think it will change anything. Not because I expect forgiveness. Just because it's true. I made terrible choices. I hurt you. I threw away something good because I thought I deserved better, and it turns out I was wrong about what better even meant. Drew and I aren't together. Haven't been for months. I'm living alone. Working. Trying to figure out who I am without all the things I thought defined me. I don't expect you to care. You have every right not to. But I wanted you to know that I know what I lost. I hope you're doing well. I hope you found whatever you were looking for after everything fell apart. I'm sorry, Walter. For all of it. Tessa. Walter read it twice. Set the phone down. Looked out at the falling snow. The apology was real. He could tell. The tone was different from anything Tessa had said during the marriage's end. No defensiveness. No justification. Just acknowledgement. A year ago, maybe even 6 months ago, this email would have triggered something. Anger. Vindication. Sadness. Something. Now Walter felt nothing except a mild sense of closure he hadn't realized he was missing. He didn't respond immediately. Sat with the email for a while. Watched the snow. Listened to Porter's steady breathing. Then he picked up his phone and typed a reply. Tessa, I appreciate the apology. I believe you mean it. I don't forgive you. Not because I'm holding on to anger, but because what you did isn't something I choose to absolve. You made your choices. I made mine. We both live with them now. I'm doing well. I found what I was looking for, peace and clarity. I hope you find the same. Take care of yourself. Walter. He sent it. Put the phone away. Didn't wait for a response. The email had been Tessa's attempt at redemption. Or closure. or whatever it was people needed when they destroyed something and finally understood the cost. Walter didn't need to provide that for her. His job wasn't to make her feel better about choices she regretted. His job was to live his own life, make his own choices, and refuse to carry responsibility for the damage others caused. That's what he'd done. That's what he'd continue doing. The snow kept falling. Porter kept sleeping. The wood stove kept burning. And Walter Harlan, 39 years old when his wife left and 40 now, sat on his porch in the quiet and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Complete. Not because he'd gotten revenge. Not because they'd suffered enough. Not because karma had delivered justice. But because he'd chosen clarity over chaos. Consequence over anger. And a life defined by what he built rather than what was taken from him. They'd lost what they thought they wanted. Walter gained what he'd never known he needed. That was enough.